Görgelt kívánok. Köszönjük szépen, Gergely. Thank you so much. It's always been a pleasure and an honor to be here. I have been part of the Eger research for some time, and today I will present something that had been part of my research regarding the history of Eger, history of Hungary, and naturally history of the Ottoman Turks. But today I will speak about only one person, one Ottoman soldier, renowned for his mastery of military horsemanship and archery, who lived between the second half of the 16th century and the first half of the 17th century. And his name is Mustafa, as it is in my title. I'm interested in Mustafa for a few reasons. First of all, given that we still know so little about the individual personal lives of Ottoman soldiers of this period, Mustafa provides us some quite rare glimpses into his personal world, such as about his upbringing, training, professional career, hopes and desperations, achievements and struggles, as well as his intellectual world, intellectual interests, sense of belonging, emotions, feelings, and a few important networks of people. Secondly, Mustafa participated in several campaigns, mostly against the Habsburgs during the so-called Ottoman Habsburg Long Wars of 1593-1606. And more importantly, he was among those tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers who were present during the 1596 imperial campaign of Sultan Mehmed III. In other words, Mustafa was one of those soldiers who actively fought here and survived these battles. And this was the time also Mustafa directly observed the new battlefield tactics and superior firepower of the Habsburgs at the Battle of Mezokeresztes, Haçava Meydan Muharebesi. And indeed, Mustafa's work, the only known written work of him, called Fevaid-i Gaza, The Benefits of War. He wrote this work for Sultan Osman II at around 1620, right before the Polish campaign, Ottoman Polish campaign of 1621. So this work can be read as a discussion of the challenges and changes in the Ottoman military system in the 1590s and the early 1600s, as Mustafa constantly mentions the problems in the Ottoman regiments. So Mustafa was one of those military experts who thought that the value of the well-trained imperial cavalry soldiers, in this case he's referring to the Kapıkulu Sipahileri, especially in close combats, was so critical. And despite the fact that the Ottoman sultans and viziers, commanders of the period, began to recruit and employ more and more musketeer infantry, who in turn also deprived many of these Kapıkulu Sipahis of their livelihoods, the dirliks, Mustafa was also one of those affected from these developments. Mustafa was not just an ordinary military expert in horsemanship and archery. He was also an outspoken critic of the ongoing problems in the Ottoman larger imperial system and military. I find that this is also an interesting exercise to look at the individual level of these big changes happening in the light of what Professor Fodor Pyle discusses in his recently English published book, The Business of State, about these changes in the taxation system and how the changes in the larger financial world affected also these soldiers. Thirdly, Mustafa was also a tutor, a teacher of his martial arts. More specifically, he was charged with the task of training the Sultan's royal household troops in Istanbul, stationed in Istanbul. But I suspect, by the way, he might be also training troops and cavalry in other parts of the empire as he moved along with the army. Indeed, in his work, he emphasizes that he could train a cavalry soldier, Jundi in his own parlance, in only 16 days for an active combat duty, just like a musketeer. And those of you who are familiar with the historiographical debates about the so-called military revolution of the 16th, 17th centuries, this is an important point, that whether cavalry, infantry soldiers, can be trained as fast as possible for any assignment. And indeed, we know that it takes months, if not years, to train archers, a good skilled archer, especially a horseback archer. So Mustafa was quite blunt in emphasizing that he actually found, in a way, a system to train cavalry in a shortest time, and that was the main reason, one of the main reasons why he wrote this book. And Mustafa is a cavalryman, of course, fighting with bows, arrows, swords, lances, shields. He knew different tactics, but these are the tactics that were slowly outdated in the face of the increasing use of hand-handled gunpowder weapons. So, and last but not least, Mustafa's work indeed captures many details about the training and tactics of the Ottoman units, but it is also a work that touches a lot of political issues as well as personal problems. For instance, apparently he was one of those losers in the larger game of factional politics of this period, that he was ousted from his position and he was kind of exiled. But in the end, he knew important people in the Ottoman capital. One of them was Darussade As Osman Ağa, the chief eunuch of the Sultan. And thanks to him and Grand Vizier Ali Pasha, that he dedicated his work, and then after that we have no information what happened to him. So who was Mustafa Ağa, and what do we know more about him? According to his own words, he was recruited as a devshirme boy by the Ottomans from the Dukakin region of modern-day Albania. I'm sorry, just a slight mix-up. And this is the sentences, these are the sentences that he refers to his origins. Arnavut hal oluptur haküm, kimseden yoktur hünerde baküm, Dukakin taşlı yürün gevheriyem, Gaziyanın hüneri serveriyem. Her kim sanat oldu fenni gaza, aslımız varis oluptur güya. So basically he refers to that he comes from the Dukakin region, and he's one of those quite dedicated, I will say, warriors for his faith. So he was a devshirme boy. We don't know exactly where and when he was born, but he says that this was the region, the Dukakin region, where the fathers of many children, boys, used to bring their boys for shooting with bows and arrows at targets at a certain distance from early ages on. And these boys were trained in archery. And among those boys who shot well were awarded. Apparently, Mustafa was a kid, grew up in such a culture in which archery was not only quite popular, but also was regarded as a gateway for more social mobility upwards. And maybe, we don't know, but maybe this was exactly why he was recruited by the Ottomans. Now, immediately after he was recruited, he was brought to Egypt, where he received training in the arts of military horsemanship, Prussia, under the supervision of several masters, including Küçük Usta. Küçük Usta is known as the master of cavalry soldiers and a trainer in Istanbul during the time of Süleyman the Magnificent. So Mustafa was trained and became a proud member of the cavalry regiments of Ottoman Egypt, which kept the former Memluk tradition in cavalry warfare. And indeed, this is another reason I can say that I'm interested in Mustafa, because he's like a bridge that combines the Memluk tradition of Russia and the Ottoman cavalry, horsemanship. And there is indeed so much to look into this connection between the works that is discussing the Egyptian Memluk style of warfare on horse and the Ottoman. Now, One thing that captures our eyes is that Mustafa always mentions the superior qualities of the Egyptian horsemen or Egyptian jundis. And indeed, these were the jundis who were invited to Istanbul by Murad III in the year 1582. In this year, there was almost a 2-month-long Imperial Festival organized to celebrate the circumcision of Prince Mehmed, who would later become Mehmed III, the famous, of course, Mehmed III. Now, Mustafa was among those soldiers invited to the Ottoman capital to demonstrate his mastery of archery and horsemanship during the Suru Humayun, the Imperial Festival. And this is a picture. Over here you can see. So Mustafa was probably among these gentlemen that you see on the screen. If not, these were definitely his comrades. By the way, this is a work of the imperial festivities preserved in the Topkapı Palace Library. The reference is there. Now, Murad III, the father of Prince Mehmed, also showed his generosity during these imperial festivals by awarding many of these soldiers, demonstrators, performers, by awarding them some positions or cash rewards in the Ottoman administrative and military ranks. Mustafa got his share. And instead of returning to Egypt, he remained in the Ottoman capital as a müteferrika. That is to say, he became like a gentleman of the court. We don't know exactly how he became a tutor, but I suspect that it was after 1596, after the Ekkor campaign of Mehmed III, that he started to train soldiers. Now, he does mention other campaigns that he participated, like Varad in 1597. Now, as he was training soldiers, probably, I think, he started to think of writing this book on this topic of how to train military soldiers. Military units, different military units. So this is really, I think, an important work because it is also written by an expert author. Because we have other works written about Ottoman military history or Ottoman military affairs, but not by the experts as many. So now, of course, the campaigns of the period were quite demanding, not just demanding for the infantry, but also demanding for the cavalry, as new tactics were developed in the age of this gunpowder revolution. Now, it was so important for Mustafa to talk about discipline and the gradual but quick formation of Ottoman cavalry soldiers who could use different weapons in a very quick, rapid succession, alternating on the horseback. And indeed, if you read his work, which is full of these details of different formations, different chapters regarding, for instance, how to shoot backwards, up, down, under the horse. So it is actually like a Memlük Fusiye, but more details are provided. Now, examining such works of Mustafa as genre of this Gazavatnames or Fusiye literature, the training methods and related cavalry exercise utilized by the Ottomans can be further expanded. Now, what you see on the screen is, for example, interesting because this is not Mustafa's work. But what it shows, this anonymous work from the turn of the 17th century, is that Ottomans were also quite paying attention to train their cavalry units in more disciplined manners. Now, we know that Ottomans were always good at land warfare. But the problem is that from the later part of the 16th century, as we all know, that European armies, such as in the Netherlands, Spanish, Habsburgs, they became also forming new regiments, regiments in new formations in order to sustain a higher rate of power. And cavalry was directly affected by these infantry firepower because they cannot approach. So it was so important to reorganize the cavalry units, train them, in different, like movements, so that they can actually be successful. So all these hundreds of designs, drawings that you see, that shows, how one, actually altogether 10 units, can move together. Now, if you are familiar with the manuals, military manuals of the late 16th, 17th century in Europe, this is one of the things also discussed, like the famous Spanish, military, I will say, expert Gustavus Adolphus. He was also very much paying attention to how he can get his cavalry effectively, in the battlefields by different movements. So Mustafa was definitely aware of these things, and he wrote on them, and many more authors, such as this one. The training ground Mustafa practiced was something like this. Now, this is, of course, a sketch, but it is important to see that the training ground, which is also coming from the Memluk period, is something, Now, Mustafa, as I said, talks about 24 different ways of training soldiers, and he insists that he can equip them in 16 days. Quite something. Now, this is the work. It has so far 9 copies I have discovered all around the world, from Egypt to the UK, and several of them are also in Turkey and the Netherlands. And it will be absolutely wonderful to have a critical edition of this work. Now, Mustafa, Mustafa, again, was one of those people who read also quite good in military history, and his work is also full of references to different traditions. For instance, he is particularly interested in encouraging his comrades, not to leave any unit behind. So, because apparently when he witnessed the Battle of Hachova, Mezokerestesh, in which we know that some of the Ottoman units actually fled the battleground, and only at the last minute they came back and won a last-minute victory. Mustafa definitely also emphasizes the psychological importance or the motivation of the comrades together. And of course, he also discusses several tricks. That's another important part. For instance, how to, get back on your horse if you are fallen during the battle. So he gives examples of that. Or how to avoid certain mistakes in facing another mounted enemy. So it starts with basic training, continuing, all that. But altogether, the overall work runs around 160 pages in modern book. So these are all the images I put just to give you an idea of what Mustafa's work looked like. Now, to conclude, of course, Mustafa is one of many soldiers who lived, fought, and died in this period of important military changes. His life intersected with several other soldiers, and indeed in his work he mentions them. But surprisingly, this gentleman, who was a figure at the royal court, Ottoman royal court in Istanbul, is not mentioned by other sources, or at least I couldn't find any reference to him. So it will be great if any of you come across a Silahşör Mustafa, a master of arms, please let me know. But of course, this is not also surprising, because we know that so many important men and so many important women of the time went unnoticed or unmentioned. So it remains ultimately on us, historians of Ottoman history, historians of military history, to discover more about such individuals. Because this is not just about one person, but this is also about the culture, about some details of military training, details of actually just lives that passed under these devastating long wars, and also very few people who left something like a legacy that we can today follow up on. Thank you.